Welcome everybody, SF Live, episode 71 already. My name is Kai Hoffman, I'm the CEO of the Soar Financial Group. Today I'm joined by Alistair Waddell, he's the President and CEO of Inflection Resources. But before we get started, as always, quick reminder, follow us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, Spotify and Instagram to get your latest updates. Make sure to turn on the alert or subscribe button, follow us there, and you'll get notified when we go live with another update. Make sure to use the hashtag AskAUCU. I love that company's ticker, by the way. It's probably one of my favorite tickers out there. Gold, copper. Doesn't get simpler than that. For your questions during this live chat, we'll make sure to get those questions in and ask Alistair at the end of our conversation. But now please join me in welcoming Mr. Alistair Waddell, President and CEO of Inflection Resources. Alistair, how are you doing this morning?
Great, thanks, Kai. Thanks for having us.
No, for sure. And we've sat down before over beer and went through the story. It's pre-COVID, actually. It's been a while, and it's good to catch up now and see what's happening. You're finally listed. But before we dive into the projects and everything else, give us a quick 60-second rundown on Inflection, please.
Absolutely. So, as you say, recently listed company. We're trading on the CSE with the symbol AUCU. We're focused on early-stage exploration in Eastern Australia. For the most part, we're in New South Wales, where we've got two major initiatives. One is targeting big copper gold and gold targets undercover. We've got a large data initiative exploiting the Government of New South Wales large database that anybody can access. And in addition to that, we've got a project in far north Queensland called Karen, which is chasing high-grade gold targets, again undercover. But for the most part, the lion's share of the interest of the company and our efforts over the next few months is focused on these big targets in northern New South Wales. And these were targets that were ultimately generated through processing high-quality regional magnetics flown by the Government of New South Wales. But we're a new story, and we're very much drill ready. We're drilling and looking to make a discovery in northern New South Wales.
No, fantastic. How long have you been at it? You've been generating those targets. It's not like it happened yesterday, right? So you've been working on this company for a while before you took it public now. Give us some more history on there, and also maybe talk about the team, because you have some really strong technical team on the ground as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you say, it's been around a while now. We're recently listed, but really the company was put together at the end of 2017. So it's been funded privately for 2.5+ years now, and it's really the culmination of the IPO is to get the funds to execute on a big drill program, which we've been planning for a while now. But it's very much a technically driven story, and as you mentioned, we've got some great guys behind this. And in terms of the board, we've got Wendell Zerb, who's the chairman of the company, obviously well known in the business. We've got Stuart Smith, who's based in New South Wales, and he's got a PhD that was done in the belt. We've got Carl Swenson, who was the former chief geologist for Normandy Mining, one of Australia's great exploration and mining groups as well. And these are the core management teams. But in addition to that, we work closely with a group out of Queensland called the Romano Group, and this is headed up by a gentleman called Dr. Douglas Haynes. And Doug Haynes was the former chief geoscientist for Western Mining Corporation, which again was one of Australia's great explorers and miners. And Douglas has been involved in a whole host of major discoveries over the years, most notably the Olympic Dam operation that BHP has right now. And Douglas was really the driver behind these targets we've generated in northern New South Wales. And that's really, frankly, what caught my attention. It was just the quality of the guys behind this and the guys that came up with the original concept.
Oh, fantastic. And it's tough to poke holes into a brand new story. Like you listed, I think July 27th or something, just recently, maybe 2.5 weeks ago. But let's run through cap structure. I think that's the biggest, or the capital market side of things, before we dive into the projects, because that's probably I wouldn't call it the biggest issue, but the biggest area of attack for me, at least, because I'm not a geo, right? So I'm easily fooled. But you're listed on this CSE, and I think the obvious question is, with all your projects being in Australia, why the CSE? Why not the ASX, and to a degree, why not the venture or even big board?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a question I get a lot. Is this not a more logical opportunity for the ASX in particular? And the simple reason for that is the majority of the funding for the early stage work was really done in North America. So the shareholder base is essentially North American. There's some European component to it, but very little Australian shareholders, very few Australian shareholders. So we did a little bit of marketing in Australia about 18 months ago, and frankly didn't have a lot of joy. We were a private Canadian company, essentially with a focus on early stage greenfields, and it just wasn't that time. And but we had success raising capital in North America, and ultimately that was the principal reason for listing over here. We really have very few Australian shareholders. So that was that. In terms of the CSC versus the venture, really there's not a great answer to that. Really mostly down to cost. And we're very much focused on getting making the best use of our treasury, and the CSC was a very cost-effective way of getting listed, and certainly we've not had any issues with that. It's been a very positive experience. The IPO went seamlessly, and I've only got great things to say about the CSC.
Yeah, so like I was going to ask you further, is like you get Sprott and RCF in, obviously, and not Eric Sprott, but one of the Sprott companies, one of the funds. But they don't seem to have an issue with the CSE. But I heard from others that funds have issues getting in, or even trading in the US or trading from the US is limited, for example. Like, is that some of the feedback you've been getting as well?
I haven't really heard that, to be honest. Certainly from our current investors, nobody's even raised that point, to be honest. It's been not a problem. RCF, obviously, they can invest anywhere, and same with Sprott. So, no, we've had no issues with the CSC whatsoever.
Now, just following up on the US angle, like any US listing planned, OTC, QB, QX listing?
Yeah, it's a very topical discussion. Obviously, a lot of groups are doing that right now. Obviously, a great interest in the precious metal market in the US right now. So that's a topic for discussion. We're pursuing a Frankfurt listing right now as well, but the US obviously is sort of a logical step. But yeah, let's see where we go with that.
Yeah, no, that's good, because I was looking for a US ticker for the title here of for Twitter, and I couldn't find one yet, so that's why it came up as a question. Fantastic. Cap structure real quick as well. Let's talk about that. You have roughly, 57 million shares outstanding and a market cap of, let's say, $29, maybe $28 million right now. 38% is owned by management and insiders. Like, run us through that. How did you acquire the shares? How is that set up?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was, as I say, it's been around since late 2017. We funded this as a group ourselves for the first couple of years. For the most part, we did a progressively higher financings. We brought in people along the way. We did a 10-cent round, we did a 22-cent round, etc. But essentially, management and the founding group put in about $750,000 over the first couple of years. So that's really how we came to have a position like that. The founding group, also the technical group, Ramado Copper, they essentially vended their intellectual property into the company for equity at that point. So that's part of the reason why the assets are 100% owned.
Yeah, fantastic. And we're going to get to that because I got a follow-up question to the 100% owned as well. But also, like, you get 22.5 million warrants outstanding, or I would say there is at least a bit of an overhang, at least on paper. It doesn't look like the share price is too concerned about that right now. Do you see the warrants being exercised right now? Do you have an accelerator in it, or is that anything you see right now?
So we're not seeing any warrants being exercised right now. The warrants, for the most part, are at 40 cents. So we're currently trading around about the 50-cent mark. So maybe we'll see those as time progresses. But the majority of those came through in a pre-IPO financing round. We did a round at 22 cents, where we raised about $2.5 million. So that's the majority of the warrants. And that's really where RCF came in, frankly. The largest holder of the warrants is RCF. So we're not overly concerned about that. We know where they are, we know who has them, and we believe they're in good hands. We did a half a warrant at 40 cents at the IPO, so it was a 25-cent unit with a 40-cent half warrant. Those have an accelerator on them at, I believe it's 80 cents. as well, and standard clause around that.
Okay, fantastic. It brings me to the next question. Because of the warrants, like, where do you expect Treasury to be at the end of the year? You're sitting at 4.5 roughly right now. What's the plan there? Like, you got to do some cash management, obviously.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things about this company is we went straight into drilling after the IPO. We announced about 3 weeks ago we've started drilling. So, we are, testing targets straight out the gate. I think by year end, we'll still have about $3.7 million at this point. Maybe a little bit more, depending how the drilling goes. But yeah, it's I think we're in great shape. We're fully financed to execute on our first pass drill program on these targets we've generated, and I think we're in great shape, frankly.
Fantastic. Let's end that topic, the capital structure topic here at this point. I think we covered all the outstanding issues here that I at least had on my heart and I wanted to get asked. Let's talk about the projects itself. Like you hinted at it in the intro a bit, like why Australia. Maybe we'll dive a little deeper into that, and then we'll go into the projects in a bit more detail in your tool program, obviously.
Yeah, so Australia, it's a good question. Why is a little Canadian company poking around in Australia? But it was really just the opportunity that arose, and I'd been looking at different opportunities to get involved with back in late 2017, kick the tires on a number of things, and ultimately I was looking for something to get involved with in a great jurisdiction ultimately where the miners want to own assets, i.e. mines. And so it was really, Canada, the US, Australia, maybe Scandinavia, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't really want to do anything in, Latin America. I spent years and years working in Latin America. So I wanted a great jurisdiction. I wanted really a big belt where we could get a big land position and very much something with a great technical story behind it. And came across this opportunity, and it really ticked a lot of boxes, and it was really, frankly, the technical people behind it that impressed me. And the way these targets were generated was just very impressive. The amount of good thought and geoscience that had gone into generating these big targets in a belt of rocks known to host big mines, it would just it really blew me away. And maybe just touching on that for a second, I mean, these targets are located in what we call the Lachlan Fold Belt, and this is a big belt of rocks that extends essentially through Victoria into New South Wales, and hosts a whole series of big mines, most notably Cadia Ridgeway, which is Newcrest's flagship operation in Australia. We've got Evolution Mining's Lake Cowal operation, and we've got the China Moly North Parkes mine. It's a big porphyry operation that's been around for a number of years now. And Douglas Haynes and the technical team behind this story recognized that this belt of rocks, well, it's long been recognized that the belt of rocks disappear under young sedimentary cover, which masks this favorable geology. And what the government of New South Wales did to essentially encourage exploration in this part of the world, they flew the whole state with the regional airborne magnetics. And Douglas and his team took this data and essentially extrapolated the known geology under the younger cover, and in doing so, identified 20 very large targets. And for the most part, these are intrusive related or porphyry type targets. So these are big systems that were identified using the magnetics. And that's when he came to us with this idea, and that's frankly what we jumped on. So we staked all of the targets. We gave Douglas and his team equity in the company at that time, and we then flew all of the individual targets with our own airborne magnetics. So these were originally generated using 400-meter spaced airborne magnetic lines. We then flew them at 100-meter spaced lines. And with that, we've now generated a very specific model for each target. We ranked them and ultimately developed a plan to test them. And we're doing a first pass drill program of 38 holes over the 20 targets. And it's going to be very much a sort of a drill and kill type program. We obviously expect a number of these targets to fail just because of the nature of the targets. They are geophysical anomalies. But ultimately, we've taken the portfolio approach to testing these things, and we think having 20 of the targets with the odds of success is kind of tilted in our favor.
You've taken some of my questions away already.
Answer to your question.
I've had so many questions about what you just said. Like, I want to start actually with you for a second before we get into porphyries and why drill 20 targets. We're going to get to all of that. But what's your background actually? Because when you say that spoke to you, like, what's your background in identifying that opportunity? What qualifies you or qualified you to identify that? Just maybe a second on you as well.
Yeah, so I'm a geologist as well, but about half my career has been with the majors, half with the juniors. But I spent many years in Latin America. I actually started my career in Australia looking for diamonds, but I lived all over Latin America and Peru and Ecuador and Chile and Venezuela, etc. And ultimately, I've come full circle. I went to all these unusual places, and now I'm thinking, Australia and Nevada are great places to be. But certainly, the big company background sort of really, I guess, focused me on recognizing what the majors want. And we touched on this. I mean, they want good jurisdictions for the most part. They want big regional land positions, ideally clean, 100% ownership, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a key part of the strategy, really identifying something that ultimately the majors would want to buy.
Okay, fantastic. Let's go back to the projects now that we covered you personally. You mentioned porphyries. That's always a word like that scares me just a little bit. A, I don't know enough about them, but B, it always means big money needs to be spent on drilling them out. You're starting now to focus on 20 targets, and I'm a burnt child. I mentioned that to you before. One of the first companies I worked with, we just used a drill and just poked holes everywhere and came up with nothing, or nothing meaningful because the market tanked and it was just useless, right? Like, why start with 20 and not with 3 or 5, and maybe drill out those a little more, spend some more effort on those, and then move on, and maybe run us through that strategy a little bit.
Yeah, so absolutely. It's really a case of, it's a little bit of a numbers game. These are geophysical anomalies. We do expect, failure on a lot of them. But really, we're looking for one big prize here. So the model is to drill test as many targets as possible for as little capital as possible here. So we're ultimately drilling between 1 and 3 holes in each target. If we don't see what we need to see very, very quickly, we will move on and drop that ground and move on to the next one. So it's a little bit of a numbers game. It's very much a portfolio approach. But, the targets that we're chasing, the porphyries, for example, these have big alteration footprints. We should be able to recognize we're in the favorable alteration associated with one of these things. Even if we don't hit the home run straight away and tag into mineralization, we're going to know if we're in the ballpark. So there's been a lot of thought that's gone into these individual targets. There's been a lot of modeling, and as I mentioned earlier, that was what really kind of blew me away in terms of the amount of thought and good geoscience that's gone into generating these targets. But there's a very specific, very focused plan to test each of them, and as I say, we'll move on very, very quickly and move on to the next one. So that's really why we've got 20 targets. We expect a lot of them to fail.
I'm curious, because you're very open about it. If we fail, we'll just move on. My question is now, how are you going to communicate to the market? Like, you're obviously doing interviews now, like we are doing. I'm trying to communicate, guys, if this is nothing, we'll just move on and drop the ground. But what's the messaging going to be like? Are you going to put out let's say a press release, like Inflection drills duster at, right? How are you going to message that, and how are you going to package that for investors to understand without losing confidence in what you're doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've tried to be as clear as possible with that, and we've really we have actually said in press release it's a drill and kill type program, and I think people that have invested understand the strategy, but it's a key thing, and ultimately we're not going to be releasing results hole by hole because I won't say it's meaningless, but it's kind of you don't get across the full story. And maybe we'll do groups of holes or release the results target by target, something like that. But yes, it's a key thing for sure, how we message that. And as I keep saying, it is a portfolio approach, and hopefully the investors understand that. But certainly the shareholder base that we have, we're having Sprott and RCF, and while I certainly understand the strategy and support the team and with the endeavor.
Yeah, they got some smart geos on their team, so I'm pretty sure they know what they're doing. to a degree, and the rocks will tell the rest of the story.
Absolutely.
You've drilled for 3 weeks now. Run us through the exact program. How many meters? You said 20 targets. But how many holes is that? How many meters? And also, with the porphyries, you often have to drill a bit deeper. I think. How deep are you drilling? What's the plan there?
Yeah. So there's, as I say, there's 20 targets. There's initial 38 holes. If you were to say, for an average about 200 meters per hole, they're all slightly different. So each target's got its own model. The depth to the bedrock it varies from target to target. So if you said 200 meters a hole, 38 holes, that would probably be a good ballpark. But ultimately, we'll find out with the drill. But the strategy is a key one. I mean, it's really about the best use of capital. And what we're using is a mud rotary drill. So this is a very cheap and cheerful way of drilling through the sedimentary cover. So we can drill a meter of mud rotary drilling down to bedrock for 50 Australian dollars a meter. And once we hit the bedrock, the same drill transitions to diamond drilling, and then it's more like $150 a meter from that on in. But ultimately, it's just a quick way of testing a lot of targets.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's we're actually running out of time. We're already 21 minutes in, and I could talk for you forever. We definitely have to schedule a second one. But also, you have a gold project in Queensland. That sounds quite interesting to me. And also, I want to talk to you just for 30 seconds about your AI approach, because that's been popping up quite often now. Let's talk about Queensland Gold first, and then I want to wrap up with the AI project. Give us a rundown on what your plans are there, and just run us through that.
Yeah. So our current project in far north Queensland, this was a target or project that was generated by Douglas Haynes and his team as well. Similar concept to what we're seeing in New South Wales. These are targets undercover, but in this case, a long strike from a historical gold mining camp called the Croydon Goldfields. This was mined out by the old timers, turn of the previous century. Classic old gold camp like you would see, say, in Nevada, a lot of old pits and workings and whatnot. And then these big northwest trending vein structures disappear under young sedimentary cover. And what Douglas and his team did, they looked at this regional magnetics, and this time flown by the government of Queensland, and recognized that sitting out along strike from the historical goldfield is this big dominant northwest trending altered structure that looked highly analogous with the Croydon Goldfield. So we've staked that, and ultimately we've flown airborne magnetics over that target as well, and we've generated 11 high priority drill targets there as well. So that's a similar vein, so to speak, to what we're doing in New South Wales, but in this case, testing high grade vein structures.
Are you working on that in parallel right now?
I'm sorry?
Are you working in parallel on that right now to New South Wales, or is that more staged later on?
It's a little bit more staged. Frankly, we just wanted to get established in New South Wales. We've got a new team. Everything's new with the company. So let's get the drilling started in New South Wales. Once we get into a bit of a routine with the drilling there, we'll step off and do the work in Queensland.
Okay, fantastic. Let's jump into AI real quick. I'm curious, what your proprietary artificial intelligence algorithm produces for you. And I know it's a small part of the story, but it's such a trigger word for me. There's so much fake AI on Twitter as well. I want to know what real AI does actually.
Yeah. So the key story to this is the database compiled by the government in New South Wales. So a lot of these, a key component to processing large data is the quality of the data itself. So what the government of New South Wales has done is compiled all historical exploration information and made it available for anybody to access and download and utilize. And this goes as far as drill holes, geochemistry, geophysical surveys, anything and everything you can imagine is put on a website called MinView. So, for example, if we were to drill a hole in northern New South Wales and drop that license, all that data becomes public domain. And, it's everything from logs, reports, photographs, you name it. Anybody can then access that. So it's a huge resource, and it's done very, very well. It's very high quality, verified data. And we've partnered up with some former Newmont geologists and executives who've ultimately built some proprietary software that is analyzing this big database generated by the government of New South Wales. And that in itself has generated about 60 targets. About half of those, or maybe even a little bit more than half of those, are held by major miners and other groups in the belt. But there was about 30 targets on open ground. And we've been sort of systematically working those targets as we've been developing the targets in northern New South Wales. But ultimately, this is a program that'll just tick along in the background while we're drilling further to the north. But it's quite a curious thing. I mean, I have to say, frankly, I was a little bit skeptical when I first heard this. But really, once you start to understand what the algorithm and the software is doing, it's actually very logical. And it's just looking for patterns and hidden relationships in large quality verified data sets. And I've been pleasantly surprised at some of the things that have come out of this. But it's, watch this space on that one. We'll see how it develops over time. And it's all part of the same story.
All right, we've got to wrap this up here. We're already 25 minutes in. We're way over our subscribe time limit here. But it's been such a pleasure. We'll definitely have to schedule an update once you start putting out some drill results. That's the next point. Just sum up for us like key news items that are coming up for you guys in the next 3 to 6 months, and then we'll end this.
Yeah, so it's really drill results driven from now on in. So there will be a steady stream of drill results. We think our initial program in northern New South Wales is going to take 5 or 6 months, and there'll be just a steady stream of news from that. We'll likely initiate our drill program in Queensland as well, so you'll see that. But really, it's about drill results from northern New South Wales at this time.
Fantastic. Perfect. Alistair, thanks so much for joining us. We'll definitely follow up in, I don't know, when are drill results due? 2-3 weeks?
We'll see.
Trying to put you on the spot here a little bit. Fantastic. No, it was a pleasure immense pleasure talking to you. Everybody else, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. Make sure to follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify. Make sure to hit the alert buttons on Twitter and YouTube as well. That way you get notified when we go live with another update. So far, so good. We don't have an SF Live scheduled for tomorrow. We'll be back on Monday. And Alistair, thanks again for joining us, and we'll talk again very soon.
Great. Thanks, Kit.